Elderly and ignored by kids? Apply these 3 golden rules. Have you ever sat quietly and wondered, when did things change between you and your children? You spent years raising them, changing diapers, staying up through sleepless nights, guiding them through heartbreaks and triumphs. You gave up weekends, vacations, and sometimes even your own dreams to help theirs come true. And now, when you speak, they interrupt. When you offer advice, they brush it off. When you need help, they're suddenly too busy. And worst of all, you feel like somehow, you've become invisible. If that feeling is familiar, please know, you're not alone. Many parents reach a moment in life when the roles start to shift. You were once the protector, the teacher, the one they ran to for everything. But now, it feels like they've stopped seeing you the same way. Sometimes they treat you more like a nuisance than a guide. Or worse, they make you feel like a burden. And that kind of pain? It cuts deeper than almost anything else. It's natural to want to react, to remind them of all the things you've done, to get angry, shout, or withdraw. But here's the truth, and it may surprise you. Trying to demand respect almost never brings it back. What actually works is something much more powerful, and far more dignified. That's what we're going to talk about today. Because there are simple but powerful things you can start doing, starting right now, that can completely shift how your children see and treat you. Not through guilt or arguments, but through quiet strength, calm boundaries, and self-respect. These aren't tricks. They're real-life shifts that can restore the dignity and connection you deserve. Let's start with something that might hit close to home: trying too hard to please them. Have you ever said yes when you really wanted to say no? Just to keep the peace? Or gone out of your way to do something for your children, even when it made you feel uncomfortable, just so they wouldn't be upset? Many parents do this without realizing. Maybe you rearranged your whole day to babysit the grandkids, even when you weren't feeling well. Or you let them speak to you in a tone that made your stomach turn, just so you wouldn't seem difficult. But here's what's important to understand. The more you chase their approval, the less they respect you. Not because they're ungrateful or bad people, but because human nature tends to value what stands strong, not what always yields. There was a woman I once met, Margaret. She had raised 3 children with everything she had. But as she got older, she started stepping aside more and more. She let them make decisions about her home, her health, even her money. "I just want to keep the family together," she said. But the more she gave in, the more they stopped listening. She thought she was being kind. What they saw was someone they didn't have to take seriously anymore. You see, respect doesn't come from sacrifice. It comes from self-respect. When you begin putting yourself second in everything, you quietly teach the people around you that your voice, your needs, your time, they don't matter as much. And people respond to that message. So if this sounds familiar, let me say this clearly. It's time to stop bending over backward. It's okay to say no. It's okay to set limits. You are allowed to speak up when something doesn't feel right. You are allowed to take up space. And you don't need their permission to do so. Respect starts with you. The more you honor your own boundaries, the more others will too. It doesn't mean being rude. It just means showing your children that your time, your energy, and your presence are valuable. And that you're not afraid to stand tall in your truth. Now let's talk about another reaction that's tempting but rarely works: arguing. When someone talks down to us, our first instinct is often to push back. You want to say, "How dare you speak to me that way?" Or, "Do you remember everything I've done for you?" And while that response might be justified, it usually doesn't change anything. In fact, it often adds fuel to the fire. Here's something that can truly shift your experience. Stop arguing. Start leading. When you respond to disrespect with anger or emotional outbursts, it shows that the other person still has control over your inner peace. But when you respond with calm, measured confidence, it sends a completely different message. It says, "I don't need to raise my voice. I know who I am." Let me tell you about Frank, a retired teacher I knew. In his classroom, students respected him for decades. But at home, his adult children barely listened. They talked over him, dismissed his concerns, even mocked his ideas. At first, Frank fought back. Every conversation turned into a debate. Every disagreement ended in shouting. And still, nothing changed. Then something shifted. Frank decided to stop fighting. He still shared his thoughts, but calmly, without trying to win. He stopped chasing their respect and started embodying it. He carried himself like someone who already had nothing to prove. And something amazing happened. His children began to notice. They started listening more, not because he yelled louder, but because he stopped playing the same old game. You don't have to fight for respect. You just have to live it. Let your calm become your power. Let your tone carry your strength. You don't need to convince your children to see your worth. They'll feel it in your presence. And one more truth that might feel heavy, but also freeing. You don't need your children to fulfill you emotionally. That doesn't mean you don't love them deeply. Of course you do, but the more you depend on them to make you feel appreciated, the more the dynamic shifts in the wrong direction. People, yes, even our own children, respect those who are emotionally independent. When your sense of happiness, your sense of peace, comes from within, not from how often they call, how sweet they are, or how much they do for you, they begin to see you differently. Not as someone clinging to the past, but as someone with a rich and meaningful life of their own. I remember Helen, a beautiful soul who had given everything to her children. But when they grew up and moved away, she was heartbroken. She waited by the phone. She called every day. She reminded them how much she missed them. And they started pulling away. She didn't understand. She was giving love. Why weren't they returning it? Then one day, she decided to focus on herself. She joined a dance class. She met friends for lunch. She started reading again, painting again, laughing again. And do you know what happened? Her phone started ringing more. Her children wanted to hear about her life. They missed her, not just her attention, because now, she wasn't chasing their presence. She was attracting it, simply by living fully. So if you've been feeling that ache in your chest when they don't call, or that quiet sadness when they don't visit, remind yourself, your worth doesn't come from how much attention they give you. It comes from within you. And the more you tend to that inner light, the more others will be drawn to it. Naturally, respectfully, and consistently. When you begin to step back emotionally, just a little, not in anger, but in strength, something begins to shift. Your children stop seeing you as someone constantly waiting for their approval, and start seeing you as someone who values themselves. Someone with depth, confidence, and quiet power. That shift is subtle at first, but it's real, and with time, it becomes undeniable. But to truly rebuild that foundation of respect, there's something else just as essential: boundaries. Strong, clear, and loving boundaries. Now, boundaries aren't about walls or shutting people out. They're about teaching others how to treat you. And believe it or not, many adult children push boundaries not because they're intentionally disrespectful, but because the boundaries were never clearly defined to begin with. Think about it. If your children interrupt you constantly, make major decisions without your input, or speak to you in a tone that makes you feel small, it's likely not because they're cruel. It's because, at some point, those behaviors were allowed and never corrected. Not out of weakness, but maybe out of love, or a desire to avoid conflict. But here's the thing. Love without boundaries can turn into resentment. And silence, over time, becomes permission. Let me tell you about Robert. He was a proud, retired businessman, confident in every room, respected by everyone who had ever worked with him. But at home, with his grown children, things were different. They interrupted him mid-sentence. They rolled their eyes when he offered advice. They spoke to him as if he didn't know how to live his own life. At first, he let it slide. It's not worth arguing, he thought. They're just being stressed, or tired. But each time he stayed silent, they pushed further. Until one day, during dinner, one of his sons snapped at him for the way he handled a simple story. That night, something changed. Robert didn't yell. He didn't shame them. He simply waited. And when things calmed down, he said calmly but firmly, "You don't have to agree with everything I say, but I expect to be spoken to with respect. And if that's not possible, I'll excuse myself from conversations like this." It was quiet after that, but something powerful had happened. He didn't threaten. He didn't argue. He just made it clear. This is the standard. This is what I allow in my presence. And over time, it worked. His children realized he meant it.